This week we begin the book of Leviticus, and the opening word that introduces us to the whole book is Vayikra, and he called, referencing the idea of God calling out to Moses. What is especially noteworthy about this word is that the last letter of this opening word is spelt smaller than the rest of the letters making up the word or the letters of the Torah. Vayikra, and he, that is God, called to Moses. The last letter, the Aleph, is written smaller than the rest of the letters. And the commentaries observe and suggest this is to show us and to emphasize Moshe's unique humility. God calls to Moses. They have a close relationship, but that never got to Moses' head. On the contrary, he remains small. Why particularly the letter Aleph smaller than the rest? Because it represents Ani, I. There was a diminishing of the I, always in regards to Moshe, a diminishing of the ego. Maybe God spoke to him, but as far as he was concerned, he was just like everybody else. But this word and this message is something that is being brought up by way of introduction to all the laws appertaining to animal sacrifice. And it makes us wonder, why is this emphasis about Moshe's humility being brought in specific as we're being introduced to the whole concept of animal sacrifice? Well, let's consider what animal sacrifice was really all about. Many people abhor the concept. They consider it anachronistic. Perhaps the opening words of the Torah that introduce us to animal sacrifice shed light on the whole concept. Because the words say very precisely, when man will sacrifice from amongst you a sacrifice unto God. And that seems to be a somewhat grammatical inaccuracy. What it should really say is when man from amongst you will bring a sacrifice, not when man will sacrifice from amongst you. Yet the Hasidic masters observe and tell us that this underscores the real emphasis of sacrifice. You see, the ideal would always be, if man wants to bring himself close to God, to in essence sacrifice himself. But of course we abhor that concept in the Jewish religion. So we do the next best thing. We bring an animal which represents man's own animalistic self, man's appetitive powers. And in bringing the animal, man is representing the idea of how he is sacrificing his more animalistic self. And that brings us into the whole concept of sacrifice in general. What is sacrifice? What does it essentially entail? Well, consider the following question. How far would you be willing to go for the sake of another person? Or to put the question somewhat differently, can you think of someone whom you would be willing to sacrifice for? Taking it to an extreme measure, can you think of someone whose life you would look to spare in exchange for that of your own? Now, I'm going to go out on a limb over here and suggest that if you ask men that question, most guys would be thinking, I'd be giving up my life for the sake of my wife and for the sake of my children. You ask most women that question, they'd be thinking, my children? For sure. My husbands? Maybe not so much. Whatever you do, don't go asking each other that sort of question, because I don't want to be responsible for the answer. But the real message over here is that sacrifice is not just always about giving up your life for the sake of another. Sometimes it's about just giving up something of yourself for the sake of another. Stepping out of your comfort zone, a lessening of the I, a diminishing of the Aleph, making space for the other person, negating your own ego for the sake of another. That's what real sacrifice necessitates. That's why Vayikra, the small Aleph, which reflects Moshe's own self-abnegation, is connected with the whole notion of sacrifice, because it's telling you and me that when you have to sacrifice from yourself, it necessitates you giving from yourself. It necessitates you embracing that small Aleph, becoming a small I in order to make more room for the greater you. I want to tell you a story about a young woman called Rachi Reifer. She grew up in an ultra-Hasidic home. As is the norm, she had her role to play as a good Jewish housewife, supporting her husband, raising her children, and at a certain point in her life, various dynamics changed, and she found herself living in Monsey, New York. There she was approached to get involved in a school, the Sheva High School. It opened up a new door of opportunity for her. She went on to study, teacher qualification, a master's degree, and finally her doctorate. The former Mrs. Reifer of Williamsburg became Dr. Reifer, headmistress of Sheva High School in Monsey. I knew Rocky because she was my wife's first cousin. And I say was because sadly one Friday night as she was walking along, she was tragically hit by a car. And at a memorial service some 30 days later after her passing, near 1,000 people turned up to pay tribute. And as one rabbi who spoke recalled what she herself once said when they were both in attendance as speakers in the high school in the morning after that fateful day of 9/11. If you ever look into a prayer book, you'll find a small paragraph after the whole prayer service. There is a concluding prayer called Aleinu, and after that we have this tiny little paragraph called Al Tira. Many people might in fact overlook this paragraph, but essentially it's always worthwhile saying and certainly reflecting on the significance of the 3 short passages that we reference there. The opening 2 passages tell us about not being afraid because God is always with us. And then the 3rd passage from Isaiah, in the name of God, which says, V'ad zikna anihu v'ad seva ani espal, ani asisi ani esava ani espal v'amalit. The word ani, which means I, appears 5 times. God is saying I. I save, I protect, I made, etc. What's the message? Well, the most common place that we see I today is on products, right? iPhone, iPad, iPod, etc. And in each instance, the I is always a lowercase. You know why? Because we live in an I generation, only ever thinking about ourselves. And frankly, that makes us lowercase personalities. The challenge is for us to become uppercase personalities. Capitalize. Yes, you're an individual. God made you as such, and therefore you are unique and extraordinary. But you're not just here for yourself. You're here for others as well. You have to be prepared to sacrifice some of your I for the sake of others. What God is saying in that verse, by reiterating ani, I 5 times, is that we all have to strive to become uppercase personalities, quite paradoxically, as symbolized by the small aleph in the opening of this week's portion. Don't worry about becoming old, says God in that verse, because I am there for you. I will help you endure. I made you, so I will carry you, and I will save you. It's the very last line that we always say at the end of the prayers before leaving synagogue. In our narcissistic, ego-driven, self-loving world of extreme individualism, there can be no better line with which to end the prayer and set the tone for the day. God is saying, you know what I is? It's about I care. It's about I help. It's about I save. It's about I'll be there for you. I love you because of you, and I will always be prepared to sacrifice some of me for you. 3 times daily we say this prayer before stepping into the working day, in the middle of the day, and in the evening when back at home. Because that's when we need to remind ourselves most about being uppercase personalities, taking other people's feelings and needs into consideration. We need to remember that as a people, we're all about loving each other, caring for each other. It's not about you, it's always about one another. Vayikra, and God called, small aleph, Moshe negating the ego just as we must all negate our own, because that's ultimately the real sacrifices that we can make in life. Shabbat Shalom.